Hey, welcome to Good Thinking Live. This is going to be fun, a little bit tensiony, but the first question that I have before we see who is here and where are you from is think about where you're sitting right now, down to the specifics like the country, the state, the city, where you are. I am here in my home office in Portland, Oregon, where outside the air quality says hazardous air quality. I think Portland, Oregon has been number one in hazardous air quality in the world for the last maybe handful of days. There are fires raging in every direction. So I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to steal a little bit of good thinking tools for how to think in an emergency. And one of the things that is super, super interesting is that there is a lot of information about what to do in an emergency and not a lot of information about how to think. So that's the purpose of the show, borrowing a little bit of time from all the time we spend on what to think and what to do, and give ourselves just a little bit more time to focus on how to think. So we're going to talk about the difference between management and leadership in an emergency, the difference between leadership and followership in an emergency, and how to use my favorite leg of the good thinking stool, critical thinking, to get you through safely in an emergency, and maybe even help others. All right, so welcome here. Let me know exactly where you are. Jennifer Felberg is hiding in my room with cracks taped up. Okay, so she's also in Portland, taping up the cracks so that the toxic air doesn't seep in. So you have to kind of have those things at your ready. Anyway, so to let me know who's here, where you're from, and we will get started on good thinking. All right, so if you're sitting here, and I'm sitting here, like I said, in my home office, and all of a sudden you hear this screeching sound coming from your cell phone that sounds like an emergency alert, what is the very first thing, the very first thought that is going to run through your mind? Oh my, Let's say then it's followed up with sirens outside. Well, that's what happened at 8:07 on a Saturday morning, January 13th, 2018, for residents of Hawaii. I don't know what they were doing. Maybe on a Saturday they were sleeping in. Maybe some were just having breakfast. But at that time, the alarms go off on cell phones, on radio, on television, and eventually sirens outside, alerting residents of Hawaii to an incoming ballistic missile from North Korea. Now, North Korea is a missile lob away from Hawaii, so it's not the most ridiculous thing. Tensions with the US are exceedingly high in 2018 and now with North Korea. And the residents get a message, and the message reads, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. So imagine where you are right now. We've got Ruchika. Hi, Ruchika from India. Welcome. Glad you're here. Imagine that where you are specifically, where you are in India, where you are in Portland, in your room, and you get this notification. People were terrified. I mean, obviously, people were terrified. Many assumed that they would die, but they scampered to, their basements or bathrooms or bathtubs. Very few shelters in Hawaii. Most houses don't have basements in Hawaii. So some were speeding down the freeway, running red lights, trying to get to their loved ones to say, I love you for one last time. You can only imagine how intense this was. Now, meanwhile, behind the scenes, the emergency management personnel, they were scrambling to figure out, what in the world? Is this right? Is this wrong? They were scrambling to verify that this warning of a threat was in fact a false warning. 38 minutes it took. Well, you think 38 minutes, that's pretty fast, but not if you're thinking, this is it. I'm a goner. I've got nowhere to go. 38 minutes before they issued a notification saying that this was a false alarm. All right. So that sets the stage for how you might feel. Like if you're one of those people who can put yourself there, which is what we're trying to do, then you can kind of see, what would you do? Like, what would you do if you got that alarm? Okay, I'm going to say hi to a few people, then we're going to get right into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to get you from this point to being mentally, not only mentally, but somewhat maybe physically prepared for good thinking in an emergency. And there's a lot of good stuff. So stay tuned. Michael Allen Harrison, good morning. Love the Monday broadcast. Love having you here. Thank you. We've got Sahil from, Sahil, where are you from? Nice to see you here. Everyone, let me know that you're here. And this is going to be a lot of participation. And there'll be some rubber chickens to award. Oh, that one's upside down. We've got lots of rubber chickens to award to participation. Unless I get too into it and I forget. All right. Okay, so here's the deal. So it turns out that this false alarm in Hawaii was determined to be due to a human error. What happened was during a shift change where they were testing equipment, someone pushed the wrong button. And note to managers that if you are looking for the birthplace of emergencies, i.e. Chernobyl, really disastrous human-made emergencies, look no further than shift changes, because those shift changes, and particularly shift changes around testing equipment, tend to be the birthplace of a lot of emergencies. All right. Michael Allen says, dear friends were there. They truly thought that would be it. They held each other and shared how great their life has been together. Right. I mean, that is the way. And it's kind of interesting now being here because although I'm in a part of Portland, Oregon, where it's smoky and bad and you can't go outside without breathing hazardous air, there isn't an imminent danger of fire, but I'm kind of close to some forest park, which could, and they've been putting out small fires. So this fire thing is salient for a couple of reasons, because who would be the one to notify me? And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. All right. So definitely look for shift changes if you're looking for places where emergencies, human-made emergencies, could be likely to happen. Stephen from Smoky City, USA. I love it. Every week, Stephen said, I'm from Cascadia, I'm from Soccer City, USA, I'm from Smoky City, USA. You get a chicken, because that's really good. Chicken. All right. Okay, so what would you do if you got that alert? And now you're in Hawaii today, and you get another alert: ballistic missile incoming. Take shelter. Now, you were fooled once before. What have you done between that first notification and now to prepare your brain for how to think in an emergency? Would you be less likely to believe it? Would you have systems in place? So there's a lot of things you might be ready to do. Maybe you've identified shelters. Maybe you have, this time I'm going to really figure it out. But what did you do to prepare your brain for how to think? Anything different? Let me know if you would, and you could just say yes. You could say same or different in the comments. If you would have a different response the second time than you would the first time. Not whether you would be more prepared, but whether you would have a different mental response after getting a notification, not knowing this time if it's true, but understanding that in the past you've had a false alarm. Same or different? Let me know in the comments. All right, that's going to be important to participate because it's going to come up later. All right, so with these fires, I've seen a lot of comments. A lot of people that I know around the state have had to evacuate. Some have lost everything, their house and everything in it. It is, it's bad. It's really, really bad. Also seeing a lot of comments about what would you take in an emergency? What would you grab in an emergency? And a lot of people are thinking about this for the first time. Now, Jennifer says different. Someone else, LinkedIn user, says different. Different response for Erwin. Different response for Devora. So we've got, most people would have a different response. Stephen says different response. We're going to talk about when you think about a different response, is it a wiser response or is it just a more skeptical response? Would that skepticism get in the way of good thinking? All right, this is great. I think I would have a different response too. I think I would have a different level of preparedness, but I think that my different response how I think might be, you might find that it's more the same after this. So it would be different. Ruchika said different. All right. Okay. So in some ways the same, in some ways different for me, but we'll get there. Probably I've learned from that Hawaii example. So there's that. All right. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. If you were notified that there was an emergency and your first thought is, what should I grab? That is something that you should take care of right now. Like, what you should grab should not be the first thought in an emergency. It is, however, the default way of thinking. But if you prepare yourself, like we're going to do, it won't be your first thought because you will already have had that taken care of. There are certain emergencies that are more likely than others. And in researching for this show today, I learned all kinds of things that I'm going to go back and kind of dig around. One of the I think I cut out for a second. So one of the problems with how to think is that people feel that if they're going to think through the worst case scenarios, that's not going to be good for their mental health. But it turns out from Stoicism that imagining worst case scenarios and really realizing that the worst case scenario is never permanent unless it's, but the worst case scenario is all likely to happen to us anyway. We're all going to die at some point. But imagining the worst case scenario and working through how you would deal with that mentally is actually a net positive. So you don't need to be afraid of mentally preparing for an emergency. All right. Mitigation is the first step, and the first step in thinking about what you would grab, go ahead and think through that, talk through that, and get that off your plate this week. Like, look up where you're coming from, where you live, and what are the top 3 most likely emergencies, and figure out what you're going to grab and do something with that now. Because when you have that alarm or when you notice an emergency, you don't want to fall back on allowing that what should I grab to overflood your brain, because at that point you need to get into the good thinking mode. And that's why you're going to have a good thinking response. Now, critical thinking, which is what we're going to really borrow from, the 3 legs of the good thinking stool: critical thinking, strategic thinking, and creative thinking. Critical thinking is really your metaphorical bridge between information and action. So think about this bridge as being potentially very, very sturdy or completely crumbled and wobbly. In an emergency, without practice, that bridge will not stand, but with practice, it will. All right, quick question. When you think about all 3 of those good thinking legs of the stool, in an emergency, would you be more likely to default to critical thinking, where you're trying to identify the reliability, relevance, and validity of information? Would you rely on strategic thinking, where you figure out the root cause and maybe how to solve the problem? Or would you rely on creative thinking, where you kind of turn the problem upside down and come up with a different solution? What would you be more likely to be called upon, or what would be like your top skill between critical, strategic, and creative thinking? Put it in the notes, because we want to know. They're all very important, by the way, but we're going to focus on critical thinking today. All right. The question that you cannot decide now, but you can prepare yourself for making a good decision later in an emergency, is the information I'm receiving relevant, reliable, and valid? So your alarm goes off, and this is where things get a little tricky. You might not know, like in the Hawaii situation, if it was reliable. You might know that it's relevant because I'm here in Hawaii, I have nowhere to go, and it may be valid, but you don't really know if it's reliable because they could be wrong. So there's never you're not going to, in an emergency, know with 100% certainty whether the information is reliable. All right, Ruchika says critical thinking. Jennifer says probably strategic thinking, but I know from you it's critical first. It is critical first, and I'll tell you why. Because the first thing you want to do is to identify whether the information that is alerting you to an emergency is reliable, relevant, and valid to the best of your ability. RRV, to the best of your ability. And for example, You could be hacked. Maybe there is a malicious actor that is followed you on Facebook, knows what's going to trigger you, knows how to manipulate you in an emergency, and they're going to hack into something that looks like a reliable source and sends off an emergency alarm. Now, I'll get to why some of the reasons why you want to have some other tools in your arsenal so that you are less susceptible. We'll get to that pretty soon. But I don't want to it's not about being paranoid. It's about not just stimulus response. It's about stopping and questioning, is this a reliable source? So there are some things you can do. There are some apps that you can verify now that are reliable, that you can download, that when you get that information from that app, maybe the app was hacked, but the likelihood of getting that information from an app that you have in prior non-emergent situations vetted is safer than getting some random buzzing on your phone and you don't know from whom, and then you just react and they tell you, oh, go this way or go that way. So hopefully that creates more good thinking and not tension, but you want to question the reliability of the information. And then you want to question whether it's relevant. Does the notice relate to the problem? Does the information help me with the issue? Now, this is an example where, we have one of those apps for one of the alarm systems, and it's constantly giving me information about all these alarms that are going off all over the city, from this car break-in, or there was a burglary here, or an attempt, and it makes it seem like, there is a lot of crime going on. But is it relevant? And so that's one thing that you want to be able to say, okay, is the fact that there was a car break-in halfway across town relevant to me? What happens when you subscribe to these things is this constant social proof of a lot of crime going on makes the availability heuristic heightened. Meaning, if I can recall a lot of crime going on because I get these notifications, do I then think that there is more crime going on? And that creates a kind of tension that doesn't work well with my good thinking, with our good thinking. Now, how many of you have notifications for that kind of thing, like different alarms going on or alerts from police, whatever, or, from crime? I don't know what different cities, if you have these alarm notifications, I would say be very careful about having too many and decide what is going to be your relevant, reliable information. You do not need to busy yourself with all of these other kind of notifications. You can certainly be aware of what's going on in the city, but you don't need the constant notifications. And here's my question. How many of you guys weigh in on this question? If you're familiar with social proof, you know that the more we see people do things, the more it seems to encourage us to do the same. And there was an example back in the 70s. I don't know how many of you remember this. Any of you from I think it was the 70s from the United States might remember that there was this commercial for anti-littering. And it was a Native American on the side of the road, and there was people littering, and there was a tear that went down his face. And it was a very, very powerful public service announcement, probably the most remembered PSA from like the 70s in the United States. Well, turns out, did it work? No, it worked to create more pollution because it showed social proof that a lot of people pollute. So here's my question. Oh, Nextdoor is hilarious. Yes. Erwin says Nextdoor. Yeah, that can make you crazy. But here's the deal, back to the Native American PSA. My question to you is, do you think that all of these notifications from Nextdoor and from Ring and from all of these things that notify you of crime, do you think that contributes to more crime because of social proof? Yes? More crime? No effect? Less crime? Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, that's one of the questions. All right, the last of the three are RRV, and then we're going to get into some really cool stuff. RRV is valid. Validity has to do with bias. And we are all biased because we are pattern makers as humans, and that's how we make sense of the world. We only perceive a small little percentage of everything that's out there. We're not bloodhounds. We can't smell everything. We're not bats. We don't do echolocation. We don't see infrared. So we are very limited in our perception. So we make patterns to make sense of the world. So nothing is without bias. No decisions are without bias. However, you want to make sure that they're not too biased. So is the information you're getting valid? All right, let's just put a pin in that for a second. Devora thinks that no, social proof does not lead, or social proof like the notifications does not lead to more crime. Erwin says yes. Erwin says criminals follow friends more times than not. I don't know, it'd be interesting. I actually look for some studies about this, specifically with regard to notifications from like Ring or Nextdoor about all these crimes, to see if there's any kind of studies, sociological or psychological studies, that show that that has an effect. I haven't been able to find any. So anyone who finds any of those studies, point them to me, send them to me. I would love that. All right. So for example, is it from a valid source? For example, is it a biased source? So if your news is all coming from information that shows you that this group of people are dangerous and they're out to get you, and then you get notification that in fact, yes, these people are out to get you, or these people cannot be trusted because they have some conspiratorial plot against you and people like you, those may not be valid sources. And one of the things is that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC in the United States, very early on during the pandemic said that masks are not necessary to protect you from the COVID virus or the coronavirus. And that really, when that came out, I thought to myself, the downside of wearing a mask is like that you wear a mask and you didn't have to wear a mask. It isn't that big of a deal. It's not like you're making a big, huge sacrifice. It just didn't ring true. But when you look at the CDC, and their job is to prevent and protect, they may have different kind of motives. Maybe there weren't enough masks and they wouldn't want to create a mass panic in this country. So you have to kind of look at where the source is coming from and is it valid? Now, are you going to be able to do that in an emergency? Yeah, you actually are, because you're going to prepare your brain now for how to use good thinking in an emergency. All right. I thought I was pretty prepared. So my husband is a ham radio guy. He's on the, emergency response volunteer. Keep losing. Sorry, think I lost my connection again. There's a lot of people streaming in this neighborhood. Clearly, everyone's working from home, so we've got a little clunky connection. But anyway, when I looked at the CDC, here are some things that you can prepare for just by going to the CDC website, just for bioterrorism, not to mention these other things. Okay. Oh, Elmer. Jennifer says Elmer. Elmer is a mentor, an experienced ham radio mentor. I love that. All right. So here are some of the things that you can prepare for bioterrorism. And this is the point. I thought I was prepared. And when I really looked for preparedness, I was not. You can prepare for possible anthrax attack, smallpox attack, glanders attack. I don't even know what that is. There are all kinds of things. Those are just bioterrorism. Then there's pandemic, natural disasters, chemical emergencies, radiation emergencies. And you go, I don't want to think about that. Actually, you do, because when you prepare your brain, you think it's scary to think about these things, but it's actually the opposite. Because in an emergency, and we're all going to come across emergencies of different kinds, you will be ready, and the net stress to your body will be less if you prepare for how to think now. All right, so what is your most likely emergency where you are now? So wherever you are in the world, do you know what the most likely emergency is? Like for us here in Portland, these fires are not normal. Never been like this before. This is unprecedented. But the most likely emergency is probably a natural disaster, earthquake. But we also have supposedly dormant volcanoes, so all these kinds of things. But we do have a very significant earthquake fault line that runs earthquake fault lines. So to be prepared for an earthquake would be like very low hanging fruit. All right. So your alarm goes off and you think about setting up your verification notifications. Now we're going to bring in addition to the good thinking 3, the critical thinking 3 rather, is it reliable, is it relevant, is it valid? We're going to get into 4 ways that you can use good thinking to be prepared, mentally prepared in an emergency. Number 1, beware of they say. This relates to the reliability, relevance, and validity. When you hear they say that this or they say that that, who is they? If you don't know who they is, then you need to question the source. Are they reliable, relevant, and valid? So who is they? Now, let's say friends say, well, they say that you should wait to see what they say. Okay, should you wait to see what they say? Should you wait to see what they say? What if the they is you? Have you ever thought about that? What if the they is you? What if everyone's saying they and there's no they there? All right. Jennifer says earthquake. Yeah, she's in Portland too. Earthquake is definitely the number 1. Rachika, even if Twitter account gets hacked by some hackers and asking for Bitcoins from leading businessmen, there are leaders took into consideration about good thinking. Yes. Yeah. Anything can be hacked. And, there's a big amount of real estate between good thinking and paranoid thinking. Good thinking isn't paranoid thinking. All right. So absolutely, I agree with you. All right. So let's say that the they is you. Are you ready to lead in an emergency? Do you think, yes or no, are you ready to lead in an emergency? And by that, I don't mean that you have all the equipment. I mean that you have all the equipment. Have you prepared the equipment that goes with you wherever you go? You're thinking to lead in an emergency. You can get all the other stuff, all the preparedness stuff, the physical stuff. You can do that this week. But are you prepared to lead in an emergency? After today, I think you will be. All right. We're going to go a little longer today. Sorry, because I have to get through this. It's super, super, super good stuff because most emergency preparedness stuff does not address how to think. All right. Practice decisions. Number 2, practice decisions. Number 1 was question they say. Beware of they say. Challenge the source. Now, practice your decisions. This is how you prepare to lead, even if it's leading for yourself. Increase your situational awareness. All right. Do you know when you go to a hotel, do you know where the staircase is? Have you looked to see, not just like the little thing on the door, but have you walked to see where the staircase is? Have you gone down to see where the staircase comes out? What street it comes out in? All right. So Jennifer says she is ready for some incidences. Michael Allen says semi-ready. Stephen says depends on the nature of the emergency. Now, turns out that the mental preparedness is almost emergency agnostic. So that's the good news. Once you have this and you practice this, you're good to go. Then all the other stuff you got to work on. All right. So you're dealing with situational awareness. If you live in a city and you are relying on GPS to tell you go right, go left, go right, go left, and you don't have a mental picture of your city, go buy a map. And bring that map to your kids, because some of these kids, they're not creating those neural connections. They're just like, turn right, turn left. Get a map and understand the layout of your city. It's not a big scary thing. Just understand it. Understand the topography. Study a physical map. Do you count the rows between you and the exit on an airplane? Yes? Do you count the rows or not count the rows? Yes or no? Do you know where the staircases start and end in the hotel, in your hotels? Those are situational awareness. Do you know in your neighborhood or in your company who has special skills, special needs, technical skills? Who's going to need help and who can help you? Do you know this? If you don't know this with people with whom you work or your neighbors, go learn that now. Devorah says no. All right. So increase your situational awareness. Super easy. It's not scary. Count the rows. Know who's who. Know your neighbors. What skills they have. What technical things they have. Rachika says yes. Good. After today, we'll all be yes. All right. Now, next thing is visualize specific emergencies. There is a big difference, and Richard Feynman talks about the difference between knowing and knowing. There is a big difference between being able to teach this, like I'm saying this stuff to you, right? And really internalizing it. Like, what if the alarm went off right now? What would I do? Not theoretical, but actually putting yourself in that role as an actor and physically talking through, even if you're talking to yourself, talking with someone that you live with or someone at your office, what would we do? That level of kind of role playing, so that you're not teaching it, you're not learning it to teach it to others, you're learning it so that your brain is prepared to act. Okay, so when you do this, here's a couple tips. Think about time. When you're going to think about role playing this emergency, think about time. Is it night or day? Is it winter or summer? Think about place. Where are you standing when this alarm goes off, when your phone starts going, ah? Where are you standing? Are you sleeping? You at the gym? You at the office? Are you out in the yard gardening? And the audience. So think about the time, the place, and the audience. Who are you with? Are you with your coworkers? Are you with young children who need you? Are you with your pets? Do any of them have special needs or special skills? Who is your audience? Think through that level of specificity when you are visualizing specific emergencies. All right, so what do you do if a fire broke out right now? Right now. What would you do if your supply chain was shut down by a military coup or an earthquake? What would you do? It's just about preparing your brain. So my husband and I are huge soccer fans, and we go to the Timbers and Thorns games, and we sit by a guy for whom his job is to deal with emergencies. And so we were asking him one day. I think I lost my connection yet again. So anyway, we sit in the same spot. Well, one night we were at the soccer game, and there was some noise going on. And Tim pointed out that there was this scuffle kind of in the audience, and it was getting a little bit contentious. And he pointed it out to us, which we were kind of busy watching the soccer game, but of course he was aware. And it turned out that he pointed out that there were two different kinds of flags that looked like it could be a political scuffle. So he pointed the people out. He told us that the exit that we usually enter and exit from is not the best way, that the best way is in the complete opposite direction. He told us that two people down from us, one guy had some special needs, so he would need some help in the case of an emergency. Essentially, he pointed out this whole mental plan that he had worked out through situational awareness that we were like, ooh, whoops, we had not done at all. And now we know when we go to the game that the place that we come and go would not be the place that we would exit in the case of an emergency. All right, number 3, manage now, lead in an emergency. And this really touches on the difference between managing and leading. How many think they know, how many of you think you know the difference between managing and leading in an emergency? Yeah, difference? Yes, no? Let me know what you think. Now, management is running the show, setting up and implementing the emergency policies, lead programs, and duties. Management is what you do to prepare for an emergency. Physical, planning, teaching, preparing. Leadership is different. Leadership is motivating and helping people, helping them follow you into a new direction. Now, you can be both a good leader and a good manager, but good managers aren't necessarily good leaders. And quite frankly, good leaders are not necessarily good managers. So decide right now, are you going to lead in an emergency? Like, do it right now. Because what you don't want is to be subject to the bystander effect. Bystander effect is where more people observe an emergency and everyone's looking and assuming that the they that they're talking about is not them. Like, oh, they're going to take care of it. And that's been shown time and time again. It's diffusion of responsibility or bystander effect. So if you're going to lead in an emergency, and you don't have to, say, I'm going to lead or not going to lead. And it's totally fine, because you can also learn how to become a good follower in an emergency, which we're going to get to in the 4th and last point. All right, number 3. Here's what you're going to do. If you say, yes, I'm going to lead in an emergency, Ruchika says, yes, there is a difference. if you're going to lead an emergency, here's what you want to do. You want to get panicked people to look you in the eye. And you want to start with the most panicked person. You want to acknowledge their personal truth, which is what they're going through, what they're experiencing. You want to lower your voice, and you want to slow down. Everything you say at the very beginning of that emergency to get people to follow you is more important than what you do initially. And you want to prioritize objective truth. What might happen along the way, assure their safety, and let people know that you're qualified to lead. And why are you qualified to lead? Because you've committed to leading. You've said, yep, I'm going to lead in an emergency. And you've worked on your situational awareness and you've practiced the decision. So if you haven't done those things, you probably can't say that you're going to lead in an emergency. But in an emergency, someone just wants to hear, yeah, I got you. I got this. And this is why I'm prepared. Okay? So if you're going to lead an emergency, commit to it now. Otherwise, you should be aware of number 4, how to know who to follow, when to follow, and what to follow. You know what's so weird? When I type in follower or followership, it autocorrects. And yet the vast majority of the time we spend is as a follower, elegantly following, wisely following, but the decision to follow and who to follow and what to follow may be the most important decision that we ever make, especially in an emergency. So here's what you look for. And we're almost done. Going a little long. Almost done. Ready? Jennifer says, lead, not manage. Has anyone committed to leading in an emergency? Are you committing to doing what it takes? All right. Here's what to look for in a leader. Leaders who clearly articulate the vision, what we know now, what we hope to know later, what we do know, and what we expect we'll have to do later. So, or what we expect to have to do later, what we'll do now and what we might have to do later. And this is quick. This is an emergency. We know this is what I expect, boom, boom, boom. Some leader who can articulate exactly what we need to do and what we might have to do later, so that when they maybe have to change their minds, you're not going, oh, they're a flip-flopper, okay? They let you know that with the information we have right now, this is what we're gonna do. However, with new information, I might change my mind. We may have to pivot. All right. They have to have the right kind of ambition. And this is difficult because if you haven't identified, like in your work, if you haven't identified who's going to be a leader in an emergency at your work or in your household or in your neighborhood or among your friends, you won't have thought through this and you might not know how to answer this. So you want to look at this now, which is not one who advances their personal agenda. It's not to glorify themselves or to show that they were the leader or to show that they were the savior or the hero. Not one who covers up mistakes. People who covers up mistakes may not be the person that you want to follow in an emergency. And it might even be someone who knows when to step aside and hand the leadership baton to an expert, even when that expert may be you. What about a leader you don't agree with? Could you follow a leader you don't agree with? Jennifer says she'll follow me. Okay. Could you follow a leader you don't agree with? Could you? Yes. No? Yes? No? In the comments? We're almost done. Emergency leaders acknowledge personal truths. They acknowledge what you're going through and how you feel. They assure your safety, but they do something else. They prioritize objective truths. What might happen along the way, and they let people know why they're qualified to lead. And so if you have a leader that's just leading because no one else is leading, but you don't have any evidence, or they don't tell you, here's why I'm qualified to lead. I have prepared for this situation. This is what we're going to do. This is that. That's, if they can't tell you why they're qualified to lead, or you haven't made a decision in advance that you're going to follow them in an emergency, they may not be the one to follow. Like I said, the biggest decision you make about who to follow in an emergency, is probably the biggest decision you will ever make. And that takes me back to the final question. Who is alerting you to the most likely risks and emergencies? Are they reliable, relevant, valid? Are you ready to lead in an emergency? Are you ready to know who to follow? So get all your physical stuff prepared. And now it's time to start working on your situational alertness, readiness, practicing decisions, thinking through the scenarios, time, place, audience, all of these things. And then make a decision or not. I will lead in an emergency, either myself or others, and commit. Turkey, hi Turkey. Glad you're here. If I missed your comments, sorry, some are streaming and I can't see them quickly. We are streaming live from YouTube. Becky Saltzman, subscribe, smash that button to get notifications for Good Thinking Live every Monday morning, 9 a.m. West Coast time, Smoky Coast time, and 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, also on LinkedIn Live. You can catch this video. Please share it with anyone and everyone who wants to get their brains ready for how to think in an emergency. Hope this helped. See you next week. We've got some really cool things in store and love all of the participation. Sorry I went long. Have a great, safe week.